Chapter 1, Shellshocked. Location, Stark Expo Plaza, New York City. The Stark Expo Plaza was alive with energy, a crossroads of cutting-edge technology and ambition. The buzz of machinery filled the air, mingling with bursts of animated conversations and the occasional flash of camera lights. Military contractors and tech innovators jostled to outshine one another, their elaborate displays promising a glimpse of the future. Amidst the sea of flashing gadgets and corporate bravado, Betty Brant was struggling to suppress a yawn. The Daily Bugle's ace reporter stood near a sleek display showcasing an experimental energy cell, her notepad in one hand and her phone in the other. Her brown hair framed a face that betrayed both curiosity and mild irritation. "This is the best Jonah could come up with for me today," she muttered under her breath, glancing at her watch. "A glorified science fair?" "Maybe he thought you'd learn something," Peter Parker teased, stepping up beside her. His camera hung loosely around his neck, and his face lit up with excitement as his eyes darted between displays. Peter Parker, her coworker and self-appointed tech enthusiast, he was in his element. For Peter, the Stark Expo was a playground of possibilities, every booth brimming with inspiration. "Yeah, like how to die of boredom," Betty shot back. "Come on, Peter, let's wrap this up. I've got better things to do." Peter grinned, already halfway through a conversation with Dr. Stillwell, an older scientist presenting a prototype energy cell. Stillwell's kindly demeanor matched his innovative work. The glowing blue device on his table was a marvel of efficiency, a potential game changer in renewable energy. "This thing is incredible," Peter said, his scientific curiosity shining through. "Compact, self-sustaining, and scalable. Is it fusion-based?" Dr. Stillwell's eyes lit up. "Precisely. You've got a sharp mind, young man. We could use someone like you in the lab. If you ever want to move beyond cameras, give me a call." He handed Peter a business card. Peter accepted it, his smile turning sheepish. "Thanks, sir. I'll think about it." "I hope you do," Stillwell said warmly, offering a handshake. "You've got potential." "Let's go, genius," Betty called over her shoulder, already walking toward the next booth. Before Peter could respond, a deafening crash shattered the air. Glass rained down as a massive figure burst through the skylight, landing in the center of the plaza with a ground-shaking thud. Screams erupted, and the once bustling crowd scattered in panic. A thunderous crash shattered the skylight above, sending shards of glass raining down on the plaza like jagged confetti. The crowd's chatter turned to panicked screams as a massive figure landed in the center of the room with an earth-shaking thud. The plaza went silent for a heartbeat before gasps rippled through the crowd. Standing tall in gleaming turtle-themed armor was Shellshock. His massive suit was plated like a turtle's shell, segmented with glowing blue conduits that pulsed with ominous energy. The helmet's faceplate bore the faint outline of a turtle's snout, adding an unsettling playfulness to his already menacing presence. "Well, well, well," Shellshock boomed, his voice amplified by the suit's speakers. "Looks like I just crashed the hottest party in town. Don't mind me, I'm just here to pick up a little something. Permanently." His glowing visor swept over the exhibits like a predator scanning for prey. Military drones? Boring. Laser-guided weapons? Seen it. Ah, but you. His gaze locked onto Dr. Stillwell and the energy cell at his booth. "You've got what I need," Shellshock said, stomping toward the trembling scientist. Dr. Stillwell stammered, clutching the prototype tightly. What do you want with it?" Shellshock chuckled, his helmeted head tilting mockingly. "Oh, nothing personal, Doc. I just need a little juice for my next big idea. Think of it as recycling. Besides, turtles are all about sustainability, right?" The crowd scrambled for cover as Shellshock raised a gauntleted hand. A concussive shockwave erupted from his palm, scattering tables and terrified spectators like bowling pins. Perched high above on a steel beam, Spider-Man took in the scene. He let out a resigned sigh. A turtle-themed villain with a sense of humor. Great. I'd laugh if he wasn't trying to level the place. Launching into action, Spider-Man shot a web at Shellshock's arm, yanking it mid-blast. "Hey, Gamera! Didn't anyone tell you skylights are expensive? You should have just used the door." Shellshock turned, unfazed, his body language radiating amusement. "Spider-Man, about time you showed up. I was starting to think you'd let me have all the fun." "Oh, I love fun," Spider-Man shot back, flipping into a landing a few feet away. "But your kind of fun usually involves explosions and lawsuits. Me? I prefer pizza and bad movies." Shellshock let out a booming laugh. "You've got jokes. I like that. But let's see how funny you are when I squash you like a bug." "All right, Turtle Boy," Spider-Man muttered, readying himself for the fight of his life. "Let's see what you've got." Betty Brant's reporter instincts had kicked into high gear as she watched the chaos unfold. She had been bored out of her mind moments ago, but now her notepad was practically smoking as she jotted down every detail of the confrontation. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a breaking story. "Peter, make sure you're getting all of this," she said, not taking her eyes off Shellshock as he towered over the crowd. She reached behind her, expecting Peter to be fumbling with his camera. "Peter?" Silence. Betty spun around, scanning the plaza. Peter was nowhere to be seen. Panic crept into her voice. "Peter, where the hell did you go?" she muttered, frustration bubbling over. Had he run for cover? Gotten lost in the fleeing crowd? A few moments earlier, as all eyes had turned to Shellshock's dramatic entrance, Peter Parker had slipped away. With the crowd in chaos, it wasn't hard for him to duck beneath a presentation table. Hidden from view, he quickly pulled off his jacket, revealing the red and blue suit beneath. "Sorry, Betty," he muttered under his breath. In seconds, Peter transformed from the mild-mannered photographer into Spider-Man. He crouched low, listening to the rumble of Shellshock's voice as the armored villain taunted the crowd. Timing his move perfectly, Spider-Man shot a web toward the rafters and swung into action. Back at the fight, Shellshock was already holding Dr. Stillwell's energy device in one hand, its sleek frame glinting under the harsh expo lights. The scientist stood frozen nearby, his face pale with fear. Spider-Man landed in front of Shellshock, bouncing lightly on his feet. "You know, I hear stealing is bad for your karma," he said, webbing toward the device. "You should probably just give that back before things get ugly." Shellshock laughed behind his helmet, tucking the device into a compartment on his armor. "Ugly? Kid, you're looking at the pinnacle of power." He flexed his gauntleted hand, the conduits on his suit glowing brighter. "You really think some sticky string and bad jokes can stop me?" "Sticky string and bad jokes have a better track record than you'd think," Spider-Man quipped, launching himself forward. The battle was fast and brutal. Spider-Man's punches and kicks ricocheted off Shellshock's turtle-like armor, sending sparks flying but doing little real damage. Meanwhile, Shellshock countered with heavy swings, each punch carrying enough force to topple a car. Spider-Man's agility was the only thing keeping him one step ahead. "You know," Spider-Man called out mid-dodge, "if you're going to model your suit after a turtle, shouldn't you move a little slower? Or maybe carry a pizza?" "That's real cute, webhead," Shellshock said, stomping forward. The battle between Spider-Man and Shellshock raged on, the clang of punches and the hum of energy blasts filling the Stark Expo Plaza. Despite the chaos, Shellshock seemed to be having the time of his life. Shellshock roared, firing a concussive blast from his gauntlet that sent Spider-Man flying into a nearby booth. The display shattered under the impact, scattering pieces of a prototype drone across the floor. "See? Told you turtles have bite," Shellshock crowed. He took a few steps back, his armored shell glowing faintly as he scanned the area. Spotting a control panel nearby, he leapt effortlessly onto a platform overlooking the chaos. "Up and at 'em, big boy!" Shellshock shouted, slamming his fist onto the control panel. A series of dormant military drones lit up, their red targeting lights flickering to life. They hovered ominously, their weapons locking onto Spider-Man. Spider-Man, still shaking off the effects of the last blow, pushed himself to his feet just as the drones began to encircle him. "Drones? Really? I'd love to stick around and watch you dance, but I've got places to be and more fun to have. Enjoy the present I left you." With that, Shellshock leapt off the platform, his heavy footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the shadows toward the back of the plaza. The drones, now fully active, swarmed around Spider-Man, firing in bursts and forcing him to flip and web-sling furiously to avoid the onslaught. "Great," Spider-Man muttered under his breath as he vaulted over one drone and webbed another. Turtle Boy runs off, and I get left babysitting his flying fleet of Roombas. Spider-Man swung gracefully through the air, webbing the last of Shellshock's drones into a tangled mess against a steel beam. The hum of their engines sputtered out, leaving a rare moment of calm in the Stark Expo Plaza. He landed on the ground with a sigh, brushing dust off his suit. "Okay, drone's taken care of, now where's the thank you parade?" he quipped to himself. A suited man stormed up to Spider-Man, his face red with fury. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've done? Millions of dollars worth of equipment destroyed." Spider-Man cocked his head, feigning confusion. "Wait, you mean those drones that were actively trying to fry me?" "Yeah, sorry about that. I'll send a fruit basket." The man's face only grew redder. "This isn't a joke. You're paying for this. You are paying for this," he shouted, his voice echoing across the ruined plaza. Spider-Man patted the small of his back theatrically, as if looking for pockets. "Oh no, I think I left my wallet in my other suit. You take web-based IOUs, right?" Before the man could respond, Betty Brant shoved her phone in Spider-Man's face, recording. "Spider-Man, care to comment on your connection to Shellshock?" "My what?" Spidey exclaimed. "You mean the guy who just tried to turn me into turtle soup? Yeah, we're super close. We do brunch." Betty smirked. "So, no comment on the destruction you caused?" "Convenient." Spider-Man straightened, crossing his arms. "Look, I stopped that guy from making things a whole lot worse. You're welcome, by the way." Betty didn't back down. "Sure, but what about?" "Sorry, gotta run," Spidey interrupted, shooting a web and swinging away. Betty lowered her phone, already imagining the headline. Spider-Man's Shell Game, Menace versus Monster. Meanwhile, Spider-Man perched on a nearby rooftop, his thoughts racing. Shellshock was smart, dangerous, and still out there. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Stark Expo Plaza was still a mess of flashing lights and chaos as Betty Brant stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the steps. SWAT teams and police officers swarmed the scene, their black uniforms gleaming under the floodlights. The barricades they had set up kept a growing crowd of curious onlookers at bay, though murmurs of speculation rippled through the gathered masses. Betty adjusted her bag on her shoulder and tucked her phone into her pocket. She was already crafting the story in her mind. This was the kind of headline Jonah would salivate over. Behind her, the remains of the expo buzzed with activity, but she was ready to move on. There was nothing more to see here. "Peter!" she called out sharply as her eyes scanned the barricades. "Where the hell is he?" Her gaze finally landed on him. Peter Parker was on the other side of the police line, waving animatedly at an officer, trying to talk his way through. His familiar tousled hair and camera dangling around his neck gave him away instantly. She rolled her eyes and started toward him. As she approached, she caught snippets of his conversation. "I'm telling you, I was in there," Peter was saying, his tone pleading. "I got caught in the crowd, and my friend Betty Brant, ace reporter, is still in there. You can ask her." The officer gave him an unimpressed look, one hand firmly planted on Peter's shoulder. "Nice try, kid. You're not getting back in." Betty reached the barricade, brushing past a few curious spectators. "For crying out loud, Parker," she called out, her voice cutting through the din. "What are you doing?" Peter's face lit up with relief. "Betty, tell him I'm with you." The officer turned to Betty, his grip on Peter loosening slightly. She flashed her press credentials without missing a beat. She walked past them both. "Thanks, Betty," he said, jogging to catch up with her as she walked briskly away from the scene. "Don't thank me," she replied without breaking stride. "You're lucky I didn't leave you here to argue with Officer Friendly. Where the hell were you anyway?" "I got, swept up in the crowd," Peter said quickly, fumbling for an explanation. "You know how chaotic these things get." Betty shot him a suspicious look, but didn't press the issue. "Whatever. Let's just get back to the Bugle. Jonah's going to have a field day with this." Peter nodded, falling into step beside her. "You think he'll blame Spider-Man?" Betty gave him a wry smile. "Do I think? Pete, I know. He's probably already drafting the headline, 'Spider-Man destroys Stark Expo.'" She made air quotes for emphasis. "And you better believe he'll expect your photos to back it up." Peter groaned. "Yeah, can't wait for Tat." They turned down a quieter street. the cacophony of the expo fading behind them. Betty pulled out her phone, typing furiously. I've got everything I need for my piece. Shellshock, Spider-Man, the chaos. Jonah's going to eat this up. You get any good shots? Peter glanced at his camera, still slung around his neck. A few, between trying not to get trampled. Good, Betty said, not looking up from her phone. Because Jonah's expecting gold, and if you give him anything less, you'll never hear the end of it. Peter sighed, already bracing himself for the storm that awaited them at the Bugle. Still, he couldn't help but wonder about Shellshock, what the villain's next move would be, and how Spider-Man would be drawn into it again. Let's just get this over with, he muttered as they headed toward the subway, the looming shadow of J. Jonah Jameson waiting to greet them. Betty Brant and Peter Parker pushed through the glass doors of the Daily Bugle, stepping into the controlled chaos of the newsroom. Phones rang incessantly, reporters shouted over one another, and the constant hum of conversation filled the air. It was a familiar symphony of stress and deadlines, but for Peter, it was a symphony he could do without. They made a beeline for J. Jonah Jameson's office. Betty walked with purpose, her phone in hand, ready to unleash the scoop of the century. Peter trailed behind her, clutching his camera and mentally preparing himself for the inevitable rant that awaited them. Inside the office, Jonah was practically vibrating with excitement. He sat behind his desk, leaning forward with a grin so wide it looked like his face might split in two. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the desk, a clear sign he was ready to pounce. Well, 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 Jonah said, his voice brimming with anticipation as Betty and Peter stepped in. What do you got for me? Betty didn't waste a second. A villain called Shellshock stormed the Stark Expo, wrecked the place, and Spider-Man was there to fight him off, she said, her tone clipped and professional. She pulled out her phone and started flipping through photos and recordings. I got everything, his entrance, his threats, the fight, the damage, and even a little soundbite from your favorite wall-crawling menace. Jonah's eyes lit up as she spoke. You're telling me Spider-Man showed up, caused a mess, and let the guy get away? His grin widened as he practically rubbed his hands together. Oh, this is gold. I can see the headline already. Spider-Man teams up with villain to destroy Stark Expo. Peter groaned internally, but before he could interject, Jonah turned his attention to him. And you, Parker? You got pictures, right? Tell me you got pictures. Peter hesitated, knowing exactly how Jonah would twist the story, but he needed the money. With a resigned sigh, he handed over his camera. Jonah snatched it up and began flipping through the shots, his expression a mix of glee and greed. Shellshock, Spider-Man, explosions, beautiful, Jonah exclaimed, his voice booming across the office. Parker, these are some of the best shots you've ever taken. Not bad for a kid who's always broke. Thanks, Peter muttered, biting back a sarcastic reply. He had no illusions about how Jonah would spin this. Jonah turned back to Betty, pointing a finger at her. I want Stark's people on record for this. Get a statement. Find out how they let this happen at their own expo. And if Tony Stark's not around, talk to his assistant, his PR flunkies, his janitor. I don't care. Somebody's answering for this. Betty smirked. Already working on it. Word is Stark's off-world with the Avengers, something to do with a Kree civil war. So don't hold your breath for a direct quote. Jonah threw his hands up in exasperation. Off-world? Off-world. New Yorkers don't care about his galactic adventures. They care about their streets, their safety, and the millions of dollars of damage Spider-Man just caused at one of Stark's events. Focus, Brant. Got it, Jonah, Betty said, scribbling a note in her pad, her tone cool and professional. Jonah turned back to Peter, his eyes narrowing. And you, Parker. You're always in the right place at the right time. Find out where this Shellshock is headed next. If Spider-Man's going to stick his nose in again, I want you there to capture it. Peter forced a smile, already feeling the weight of the assignment. Sure thing, Mr. Jameson, he said, his voice tight. Jonah's excitement returned in full force as he clapped his hands together. Good. Now let's get this front page ready. Shellshock strikes, Stark Expo in ruins. People are going to eat this up. As Jonah leaned back in his chair, clearly already envisioning tomorrow's issue flying off the shelves, Peter grabbed his camera and turned to leave. Great work, Parker, Jonah called after him, his voice laced with mock enthusiasm. Keep it up, And maybe one day you'll afford lunch. Peter muttered under his breath as he exited the office. Yeah, lunch sounds nice. Too bad rent's due first. Betty caught up with him in the hallway, flipping her notepad shut. Rough day, huh? She teased. Peter shot her a look. Rough day? Jonah just turned me into a headline machine for his Spider-Man smear campaign. Again. Betty shrugged, a smirk tugging at her lips. At least your photos are good. You should take that as a win. Peter rolled his eyes as they headed for the elevator. Yeah, some win. Can't wait to see tomorrow's paper. Betty glanced at him, her smirk growing. For what it's worth, I think he's wrong about Spider-Man. Most of the time. Peter smiled faintly, but said nothing, the weight of his double life pressing on him more heavily than ever. As the elevator doors closed, he couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could keep juggling it all.